The morning of July 20th, 1942, brought sticky heat and suffocating humidity to the South Pacific. On the island of Espiritu Santo, something that should have been impossible was taking shape. Just 3 weeks earlier, dense jungle had covered this ground. Now American bulldozers were completing the finishing touches on a runway stretching 6,000 feet across the cleared landscape. The 3rd Construction Battalion Detachment of the U.S. Navy, the CBs, had pulled off something extraordinary. Working with just 6 tractors, 2 scrapers, and 387 men, they had accomplished what Japanese military strategists insisted would demand months of work and thousands of laborers. No Japanese observer left behind a diary entry about this particular accomplishment, though Japanese intelligence would eventually catch wind of it. What captured documents and post-war interviews tell us is that Japanese military planners had made a catastrophic miscalculation about American construction strength. Their pre-war assessments, found in translated documents, show they believed American forces would need a full year or more, maybe even longer, before they could launch offensive operations after taking new territory. Reality would prove them devastatingly wrong. The story of how Japanese commanders learned about CB construction abilities doesn't come from eloquent diaries or detailed personal accounts. Most of those were lost. Instead, this story emerges by combining American construction records, the Japanese strategic decisions that show their dawning awareness of this capability, and the handful of Japanese sources that survived the war. It's a story told through hard numbers, documented facts, and the unmistakable strategic consequences that forced Japanese leaders to face a truth more crushing than any single battlefield loss. They were up against an enemy whose industrial and engineering power dwarfed their own by a scale they had never thought possible. The Japanese first ran into American construction capabilities in a serious way during the Guadalcanal campaign, though they didn't immediately grasp how significant it really was. When American Marines came ashore on August 7, 1942, they took over a nearly finished Japanese airfield at Lunga Point. The Japanese had put 2,774 workers to the task, 1,379 Japanese, 1,145 Koreans, and 250 local civilians, laboring for more than a month to build what would become Henderson Field. Within 6 days, the Americans had that airfield running. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, the first CBs to experience real combat, touched down on September 1, 1942, with 387 men and 5 officers attached. What unfolded next would establish a pattern that would repeat across the entire Pacific. According to official Naval Construction Battalion records, these CBs got right to work expanding and improving Henderson Field, while Japanese planes and ships attacked nearly every day. Japanese aircraft, flying out of Rabaul, came over at noon like clockwork, their Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers dropping explosives across the installation. The night stretching from October 13th into October 14th, 1942, brought something worse. Japanese battleships, the Kongo and Haruna, opened fire with their massive guns, hurling over 914-inch shells at the airfield and tearing 53 craters into the runway. When morning came on October 15th, that runway was ready to use again. The Japanese military's response to all this revealed they were beginning to understand what American construction meant. Admiral Yamamoto himself changed the combined fleet's primary objective. Instead of just supporting ground operations, their main job now became destroying Henderson Field. The Tokyo Express high-speed destroyer runs, which could only carry limited cargo and couldn't transport heavy equipment, were designed specifically because Henderson Field threatened slower transport ships. This major shift in Japanese logistics, forced to happen because of one rapidly built and quickly repaired airfield, would eventually contribute to starving and defeating the Japanese forces stuck on Guadalcanal. Colonel Keonao Ichiki led the first major Japanese counterattack aimed at taking back Henderson Field. His confidence ran high. His 917-man unit believed they could recapture the airfield. His force got wiped out at the Battle of the Tanaru on August 21, 1942. Though Ichiki's personal papers went down with him, operational orders from his unit that were captured show no evidence he understood American building abilities. The Japanese anticipated finding a partially finished, lightly defended airfield. What they encountered instead was a fully functioning base already hosting 31 Marine aircraft. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, who commanded the Japanese 17th Army, attempted three major offensives to retake Henderson Field between August and November 1942. Each assault rested on the belief that once damaged, the airfield would sit out of action for weeks while repairs happened. Following the October naval bombardment, the heaviest attack of the whole campaign, Hyakutake's planners calculated the field would be unusable for at least 7 days. Its restoration in just hours forced them to completely rethink what American forces could actually do, a realization that would reshape how Japanese strategists planned everything going forward. As American forces pushed westward into the Central Pacific throughout 1943, the gap between American and Japanese construction speed became impossible to ignore. The Gilbert Islands campaign provided perhaps the starkest proof of how fast Americans could build. At Tarawa, the 74th Naval Construction Battalion came ashore with the Marines during the assault that ran from November 20th through November 23, 1943. The Japanese defenders, roughly 5,000 troops from the 3rd Special Naval Landing Force and 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force, had spent months fortifying Baitio Island. They had put together a 4,500-foot airstrip using mainly human muscle and basic hand tools, labor that consumed several months. The CBs got that battle-scarred airfield working in 15 hours flat. This 15-hour figure isn't an estimate or war propaganda. It's documented in official Naval Construction Battalion action reports that remain in the record. We have no diary entries from the Japanese defenders who watched this happen, because most of them died in the battle's final desperate charge. Yet Japanese high command could plainly see what this meant for strategy. Intelligence documents captured later show Japanese staff officers working through calculations, proving that American forces could now seize air superiority over any territory they captured in days, rather than stretching it across weeks or months. The Marshall Islands operations in early 1944 reinforced this new reality Japanese leaders now had to accept. At Kwajalein, the 121st Construction Battalion took over the damaged Japanese facilities and rapidly transformed them into a working aviation base, even while combat continued all around them. More significantly, at Eniwetok, the 110th Naval Construction Battalion took the battered Japanese runway and rebuilt it into a 6,800-foot bomber strip designed to handle B-24 operations targeting the Japanese stronghold at Truk. The failure of Japanese intelligence regarding American construction emerges clearly in translated documents held in the National Institute for Defense Studies archives. Pre-war Japanese estimates had pegged American merchant shipping production at 5 million tons for 1943. Actual production reached 19.2 million tons, nearly 400% higher than their guess. Similarly, Japanese intelligence predicted the U.S. Navy would field 13,070 officers and 296,000 enlisted personnel by December 1943. The actual number was 219,279 officers, 120,472 officer candidates, and over 2 million enlisted sailors, more than 7 times their estimate. Yet this intelligence miscalculation mattered far less than their blindness about construction. Japanese military doctrine, preserved in captured manuals and training materials, budgeted months for major airfield projects. The Japanese had no frame of reference for rapid mechanized building. Their construction units, like the 17th Setsu Saitai captured in the Solomons, worked with primitive hand tools, 900 shovels, 90 hoes, and limited rollers. They couldn't fathom that American aviation engineer battalions, deployed with over 140 vehicles and more than 200 pieces of construction gear each. The Marianas Campaign in summer 1944 brought the construction gap into crystal-clear strategic focus, because these islands would become bases for B-29 bombers to strike at Japan itself. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding the Japanese 43rd Division on Saipan, witnessed American construction that shattered everything in his military background. Saipan's Aslito airfield fell to American forces on June 18, 1944, just 3 days into the invasion. 4 days after that, Seabees from the 3rd Battalion 20th Marines, working alongside the 121st and 18th Construction Battalions, had the field ready for P-47 fighters. By July, even as fighting continued raging through Saipan's northern mountains, the airfield was being expanded to accommodate the massive B-29 Super Fortress bombers. The first B-29, Jolton Josie from the 73rd Bombardment Wing, touched down on October 12, 1944. General Saito never got to write his story. He took his own life on July 7, 1944, as American forces closed in around him. But his final orders, preserved in translation, reveal his grasp of what rapid airfield construction meant for Japan's future. The enemy's barbaric assault continues unabated. We expect the enemy will soon launch their general all-out offensive. I shall defend our sovereign's domain until death itself. I shall never accept the shame of capture. Saito grasped that Saipan's airfields would put Tokyo within bomber range. What he couldn't have fully understood was the sheer scale of construction that would come next. Turning Saipan into a major B-29 base meant moving millions upon millions of tons of coral and earth. Seabees drove their Caterpillar D7 and D8 bulldozers 20 hours every day, with just 4 hours reserved for maintenance and repairs. The D8, packing 148 horsepower and hydraulic controls, could accomplish what hundreds of manual workers would need weeks to finish. The Japanese possessed nothing remotely comparable. When American forces captured the 17th Setsusai Tai construction unit in the Solomons, interrogations catalogued their entire equipment inventory: 5 trucks, 1 steamroller, and hand tools. Japanese commanders on Saipan had estimated that properly fortifying their positions would require months of work. American Seabees erected multiple operational airfields in weeks. Even more mind-boggling to Japanese thinking was the American capacity to build while combat raged around them. Japanese military philosophy emphasized warrior spirit, Yamato Damashi, over material advantages. But at Saipan, they saw combat engineers who functioned as both fighters and builders simultaneously. The 121st Construction Battalion originated with the Marine Corps, and its personnel engaged in combat as infantry, while also running construction machinery. This double capability, combat skill merged with engineering expertise, fell outside anything Japanese military experience had prepared them for. If Saipan astonished Japanese commanders, what occurred on nearby Tinian surpassed comprehension. The building project executed there ranks among the biggest and fastest military engineering accomplishments in all of history. Between July 1944 and May 1945, the 6th Naval Construction Brigade, consisting of 15,000 Seabees, converted Tinian into the planet's largest bomber base complex. The figures, confirmed by Naval Construction Battalion records, remain breathtaking even now. 6 runways, each stretching 8,500 feet, were carved straight from jungle and coral. Northfield featured 4 parallel runways, each capable of launching B-29s on 3,000-mile round trips back to Japan. Westfield contributed 2 additional runways. The coral that got hauled, blasted, and compacted down equaled what it would take to fill Hoover Dam 3 separate times. Japanese forces positioned on Tinian, led by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, numbered about 9,000 troops. Most perished defending the island, yet the velocity of American construction showed itself plainly even throughout the fighting. Seabees reached the beaches with the invasion forces on July 24, 1944. By August 1st, despite Japanese forces still occupying the island's southern regions, American engineers were already fixing and expanding what had been the Japanese fighter strip at Northfield. The Japanese had created their original Tinian airfields through many months of work using forced labor from Chamorros and Koreans. A Japanese engineering report retrieved from Tinian, rendered into English by ATIS, outlined their construction approach. Coral smashed manually, concrete blended by hand, picks and shovels serving as the primary implements. The report stated that adding just 1,000 feet to a runway required 1,000 workers toiling for 2 full months. American Seabees extended Tinian's runways by 4,000 feet in under 30 days. The emotional toll this construction speed had on surviving Japanese personnel can be gathered from interrogation records kept by the Office of Naval Intelligence. Though these interrogations emphasized military intelligence rather than construction observations, several prisoners independently brought up their shock at seeing American machinery and equipment. One captured Naval Construction Unit member put it simply, "We could not compete with the U.S. Navy method that used bulldozer and power shovel versus our method that used shovel and scoop by humans." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, in charge of the Japanese garrison defending Iwo Jima, may have been the Japanese officer best equipped to understand American industrial power. He had worked as a military attaché stationed in Washington, D.C. from 1928 through 1930 and had traveled widely throughout America. His letters home, later released as picture letters from the Commander-in-Chief, offer some of the rare surviving Japanese views of what Americans could accomplish. On February 19, 1945, when American Marines stormed ashore at Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi supervised roughly 21,000 defenders. He had invested months hardening the island's positions, turning it into an underground stronghold. Japanese construction crews had tunneled 11 miles beneath the surface, built underground command centers, and created hidden artillery placements. This counted as one of the war's most ambitious Japanese construction efforts, executed gradually across numerous months. The American response reflected a completely different building philosophy: velocity trumping concealment, machine strength superseding manual effort. The 31st and 133rd Naval Construction Battalions came ashore with the assault forces. The 133rd NCB, working under the 4th Marine Division, would experience the highest casualty rate in all of CB history: 40 killed, 156 wounded, and 48 sent away because of illness, from a unit of around 1,100 men total. Despite mounting losses and relentless fighting, American forces pushed forward with construction at a rate that left Japanese engineers baffled. Barely a week had passed since the invasion when the first damaged Japanese airfields came back into service. On February 26, just 7 days after the landings, an OY-1 spotter plane touched down on the repaired runway, proof that the Americans were already turning captured facilities into operational bases. By March 4th, the situation had escalated dramatically. A B-29 Superfortress, named Dynamite, limped in for an emergency landing, its fuselage damaged from a bombing run over Tokyo. The crew had no hope of making it back to the Mariana Islands, but the rapidly restored Iwo Jima airfield gave them a second chance at life. The airfield that should have been rubble became their salvation. Kuribayashi never got to witness what came next. He fell during the final Japanese counteroffensive on March 26, 1945. Yet his pre-invasion assessment, discovered in Japanese military archives and later decoded by American translators, showed he understood one crucial truth: the enemy had resources and equipment that Japan simply could not match. What he couldn't foresee was how quickly American forces could rebuild under constant fire. One story captured this reality better than any statistics. Japanese troops on Mount Suribachi had spent 2 full years trying to carve a road to the summit. American bulldozers accomplished the same task in just 14 days. According to Marine Corps records, a captured Japanese officer reportedly wept when he learned how fast the Americans had worked, though historians cannot confirm his specific identity. By the time fighting ended on March 26th, more than 2,400 B-29s would make emergency landings at Iwo Jima. Those landings saved roughly 27,000 aircrews from ditching into the Pacific. All of this became possible because American construction crews had built and maintained functional airfields while enemy shells fell around them. Japanese military planners had never imagined such a thing could happen. The battle for Okinawa, which opened on April 1, 1945, gave the Japanese one final brutal lesson in American construction power. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara served as the senior operations officer for the Japanese 32nd Army, putting him in an unusual position. He lived to tell about it. Unlike most of his counterparts who died in the fighting, Yahara survived and later published his memoirs, The Battle for Okinawa, offering Japanese military leaders one of the few first-hand accounts of American capabilities. Yahara carried something unusual into this final battle: direct experience with American methods. From 1933 to 1935, he had served as an exchange officer, studying at Fort Myer and touring American military bases across the country. He had a more realistic picture of American strength than most Japanese officers. Even so, what he witnessed at Okinawa shook him. The numbers alone told a staggering story. Within hours of the April 1st landings, American forces had seized both Kadena and Yontan airfields. The Japanese had left these facilities almost unguarded, a tactical blunder that would haunt them throughout the campaign. By April 3rd, construction battalions from the 58th Engineer Battalion and the 1901st Aviation Engineer Battalion were already expanding and repairing both fields. Within 7 days, American fighters were operating from both airfields, providing close support to infantry units grinding forward. What followed was construction on an unimaginable scale. Eventually, 95,000 construction workers, Army and Navy personnel combined, would labor on Okinawa. Their mission included facilities designed to accommodate 4,000 aircraft. The 8th, 10th, 70th, and 11th Naval Construction Brigades didn't just build airfields. They constructed harbors, ammunition storage areas, medical facilities, fuel depots, supply warehouses, and barracks. Essentially, they erected an entire military city while Japanese artillery pounded from the hills. Yahara's memoir documents his mounting awareness that American forces could establish operational bases faster than he could organize counterattacks. His account of the Japanese offensive, launched on April 19th, reveals the trap they faced, attacking American positions that were constantly being reinforced and resupplied through an ever-expanding network of newly constructed facilities. What Yahara witnessed, but perhaps couldn't fully articulate, was a fundamental clash of military philosophies. Japanese military thinking revolved around Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit, a belief that warriors' resolve could overcome material shortages. American military doctrine married combat power directly to industrial production. The combat engineers represented this difference perfectly. These men carried rifles and operated bulldozers with equal competence. They brought construction industry expertise directly to the battlefield. Japan had developed nothing comparable. Japanese construction relied on two inadequate models: military engineers with minimal equipment or conscripted civilian laborers with no combat training whatsoever. When American forces captured the 17th Naval Base Force in the Solomon Islands, interrogators discovered the men had received virtually no weapons training and possessed almost no heavy equipment. They were diggers and haulers, not fighting builders. After the war ended, American investigators discovered the scale of Japanese misunderstanding through extensive interrogations. The Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted between 1945 and 1946, systematically questioned Japanese military and government officials. Those interviews, combined with captured documents translated by the Allied translator and interpreter section, revealed a stunning intelligence failure. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, who served as Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet and later commanded the Second Air Fleet, admitted during post-war questioning that Japanese naval planning had never accounted for the speed of American base construction. The entire Japanese strategic concept assumed that capturing an island meant gaining a defensive fortress that could be held for months while reinforcements arrived. The American capacity to transform captured islands into active offensive bases within days or weeks demolished this entire strategic framework. Japanese planners had calculated that a 6,000-foot runway suitable for heavy bombers would require between 3,000 and 5,000 workers, laboring for 3 to 6 months. American combat engineers completed identical runways with just 100 men in 20 days. This 5 to 6-fold advantage in efficiency, multiplied by America's ability to deploy dozens of construction battalions simultaneously, meant American progress unfolded at speeds Japanese military thinking could not process. The equipment disparity was equally striking. A single D8 bulldozer could displace more earth in 60 minutes than 300 men working with shovels could move in a full day. By 1944, American forces operating in the Pacific controlled hundreds of these machines. Japan possessed so few bulldozers that captured American equipment became more valuable than almost any other military asset. This construction gap reflected deeper differences in industrial capacity and military organization. Japanese military construction still relied on approaches inherited from traditional civilian practices. Workers with picks, shovels, and human-powered carts dominated the labor process, partly due to equipment shortages, but also because Japanese military culture valued this kind of manual toil. Japanese doctrine stressed spiritual strength and physical toughness. Hard manual labor wasn't merely a practical necessity, but a character-building exercise viewed as spiritually significant. American military construction represented something entirely different: the complete industrialization of engineering. American combat engineers came from the construction trades, bringing years of civilian experience with them. Industrial methods became military methods overnight. Time motion studies, equipment maintenance protocols, and standardized procedures, all normal in American commercial construction, were applied to military operations. The mass production and standardization that defined American construction seemed almost incomprehensible to Japanese builders. In America, items like storage tanks and fuel systems rolled off factory assembly lines as complete units, ready to ship across the ocean. Japanese construction involved improvising with local materials and custom building almost everything from scratch. This approach made American construction simultaneously faster and more reliable across different locations. The psychological impact on Japanese forces as they gradually understood American construction superiority emerges clearly through prisoner statements, military records, and post-war memoirs. Though genuine personal testimony remains sparse because most letters home were heavily censored. Yet a clear pattern emerges: confidence transforming into confusion, then descending into despair. Japanese military doctrine, anchored in the concept of Yamato Damashi, taught that warrior spirit could overcome material disadvantage. Early victories, Pearl Harbor, the rapid conquest of Southeast Asia, seemed to validate this belief system. Japanese forces had beaten Western militaries with inferior equipment, but superior fighting determination. Then came Guadalcanal, where American construction capabilities became visible. Henderson Field rose quickly from the jungle and absorbed Japanese bombardment in ways that suggested something more than mere material advantage: an organizational and industrial capacity that Japanese forces simply lacked. By 1943, interrogations of captured Japanese construction workers revealed growing shock at American equipment. They had witnessed capabilities they couldn't explain with traditional military concepts. Field commanders began grasping the strategic implications. Every airfield seized became operational within days. Every island transformed into a launching point for the next offensive. The defensive perimeter that should have exhausted American forces through prolonged island-by-island conquest was being systematically bypassed. American construction allowed island hopping, leaping over heavily defended positions to establish bases on lightly held terrain. By 1944, the psychological impact had reached Japan's highest military leadership. The fall of Saipan, which placed Japan within B-29 striking distance, triggered the collapse of the Tojo government. Military commanders understood the terrible mathematics. American construction meant every captured island instantly became a platform for bombing Japan itself. B-29 bases rose on Tinian and Saipan faster than Japan could devise responses. The final phase, despair, appears in late-war defensive strategy. The decisions not to defend beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, instead preparing elaborate inland positions, reflected grim understanding. American forces would establish beachheads and support infrastructure regardless of resistance. The goal shifted to inflicting maximum casualties, hoping combat costs would drive Americans toward negotiated peace. American construction capabilities, particularly the combat engineers, fundamentally reshaped how the Pacific War unfolded. This wasn't merely about building bases faster. It represented a revolution in military strategy enabled by construction technology and organizational sophistication. The island-hopping campaign itself became possible because of rapid construction. Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision to bypass Rabaul, the massive Japanese stronghold in the Southwest Pacific, depended entirely on the ability to quickly construct airfields on nearby islands that could neutralize Rabaul through air superiority. The timeline compressed dramatically. Pre-war Japanese strategic assumptions predicted an American offensive across the Pacific would consume years of methodical advance, with extended pauses for base construction at each step. Instead, American forces traversed over 3,000 miles from Guadalcanal to Okinawa in less than 36 months. Each newly captured territory became operational almost immediately, enabling the next jump forward. Meanwhile, a massive information gap separated what Japanese soldiers experienced in the field from what civilians learned at home. Japanese censorship, extraordinarily strict even by wartime standards, systematically suppressed truth about American construction and industrial dominance. Soldiers' letters underwent rigorous filtering. Any mention of American equipment capabilities, construction speed, or material superiority got deleted before mailing. A handful of uncensored letters, mostly those never reaching Japan, exposed soldiers' awe at American capabilities, perspectives that never reached the home front. Japanese propaganda consistently portrayed Americans as spiritually hollow, dependent on material comfort, incapable of matching Japanese warrior resolve. Radio Tokyo broadcasts, intercepted and decoded by American intelligence agencies, hammered this message repeatedly. Japanese spiritual superiority would overcome American material abundance. The reality that American forces possessed both massive material advantages and the toughness to endure harsh battlefield conditions remained hidden from ordinary Japanese citizens. Official military reporting itself became distorted. The Saipan defense was presented as a heroic stand against overwhelming numbers, with no acknowledgement that American forces had already begun constructing operational B-29 bases while fighting raged. The rapid American surge through the Philippines got attributed to numerical superiority, rather than the unprecedented speed of establishing support facilities. This information gap carried strategic weight. Japanese civilian morale held relatively steady until B-29 raids intensified in late 1944, when the reality became impossible to hide. Ordinary people in Japan struggled to comprehend how American bombers could suddenly appear over their homeland when the defensive line was supposedly still intact. They had no way of knowing that American construction teams had rapidly assembled enormous military complexes across captured islands in just a few months. Understanding the massive scale of American building efforts in the Pacific becomes essential to grasping how Japan's strategic position crumbled so completely. By the time the war ended, construction battalions and army engineers had woven the entire Pacific into a vast network of American military installations. This infrastructure made Japan's strategic situation hopeless from that point forward. The construction battalions themselves swelled to 325,000 personnel by war's end, with 4 out of every 5 deployed to Pacific operations. These workers built 101 major runways and 441 piers scattered across the region. They erected ammunition storage facilities for 2,158 different locations and constructed warehouses spread across 700 city blocks worth of land. Housing rose for 1.5 million troops, along with fuel depots holding 100 million gallons. They established over 300 bases distributed across countless islands throughout the theater. The machinery brought in was equally overwhelming in scope. American factories produced more than 50,000 bulldozers during wartime, with thousands arriving in the Pacific. The Caterpillar D7 served as the primary workhorse, tipping the scales at 15,000 pounds and delivering 25,000 pounds of drawbar pull. Japan possessed nothing remotely similar in capability. Steel matting technology, specifically pierced steel plank systems, fundamentally changed how airfields could be constructed. Each individual plank measured 10 feet in length and 15 inches across, weighed 66 pounds, and featured 87 drainage apertures. American factories churned out sufficient matting by 1943 to surface 240 runways, each measuring 150 by 5,000 feet. Overall production totaled 2 million tons, equivalent to the steel needed to build 600 Liberty ships. This modular runway material permitted crews to convert a cleared patch into a working airfield within mere hours instead of multiple days. The human performance numbers were perhaps the most striking. At Henderson Field, construction crews maintained and repaired the runway despite 140 Japanese airstrikes and 2 substantial naval bombardment campaigns. During the October 13-14 battleship bombardment, workers patched 53 bomb craters and restored the runway to operational status by dawn. This restoration capacity surpassed the rate of destruction itself, an experience completely foreign to Japanese military thinking. Construction speed records fell repeatedly. The airstrip construction completed at Espiritu Santo in July 1942 took only 20 days and set a benchmark for what might be possible. By 1943, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion finished a 3,300-foot runway on Vanuatu in just 9 days. When Tarawa fell in November 1943, engineers rehabilitated its airfield in 15 hours flat. Tinian Island alone showcased the true extent of American construction capability and industrial might. Within a single year, 15,000 construction workers had assembled the planet's most extensive airbase installation. Northfield boasted 4 parallel runways, each 8,500 feet long, capable of launching 100 B-29 Superfortress bombers daily. This single complex, erected in months, could deliver more tonnage of explosives toward Japan than the entire Japanese military possessed for defense. Okinawa's situation proved even more striking. Construction plans anticipated facilities for 4,000 aircraft, exceeding Japan's remaining air strength. Harbor installations for the invasion armada, ordnance depots for the planned assault on the Japanese mainland, medical facilities for anticipated casualties, and supply centers for millions of soldiers were all under active construction when Japan surrendered unconditionally. The 95,000 construction personnel stationed on Okinawa were busy erecting infrastructure for Japan's final defeat. Most senior Japanese commanders who actually saw American construction capabilities did not survive the war. Yet available evidence from multiple sources paints a striking picture of how Japanese forces perceived and responded to these capabilities. American construction records document the precise sequence and scope of operations. Japanese military decisions expose mounting recognition of construction's significance in overall strategy. Surviving Japanese accounts offer occasional glimpses of professional respect mixed with strategic desperation. Colonel Hiromichi Yohara emerged as perhaps the most valuable witness, having survived the conflict and recorded his experiences afterward. His observations about Okinawa emphasize American construction, proceeding with almost mechanical regularity. American engineers worked sometimes half a mile beyond the front lines. He watched surveying teams from the construction battalions working for days in contested territory, staking out future construction zones despite incoming fire. Yohara's post-war analysis recognized that American construction capacity had rendered the entire Japanese defensive strategy obsolete. "Our defensive strategy depended on holding territory," he later wrote. But American forces transformed every captured location into a base for further operations. Any position we abandoned quickly became another platform for enemy advances. This realization arrived far too late to reshape Japanese strategy, though it demonstrated that certain Japanese officers grasped the fundamental problem. Captain Rikihei Inoguchi, serving as senior staff officer for Admiral Onishi, who conceived the kamikaze operations, survived the war and left accounts of Japanese naval thinking regarding American capabilities. Though his primary focus centered on aerial operations, he acknowledged that American speed in establishing air bases had made conventional naval strategy obsolete. Every island taken immediately extended American air power coverage westward, pushing the defensive perimeter inward faster than Japanese forces could respond. The most comprehensive Japanese perspective on construction capabilities emerged not from military commanders, but from Japanese engineers responsible for defensive fortifications. Interrogations following the war of surviving members of Japanese construction units revealed their sense of professional awe regarding American techniques. An engineer from the 17th Engineer Regiment reportedly commented that observing American construction felt like witnessing tomorrow arriving today, machines accomplishing in hours what required weeks of human labor from his unit. More significant than individual accounts, however, are the military decisions that demonstrate Japanese comprehension of American construction capabilities. The decision to abandon beachhead defense at Iwo Jima and Okinawa in favor of fighting from fortified interior positions reflected understanding that American forces would establish landing zones and supply facilities, regardless of beach resistance. The strategic pivot from territorial control towards simply maximizing American casualties acknowledged that construction capabilities made conventional defense untenable. The kamikaze program itself partially stems from this same realization. Conventional naval aviation demanded extensive bases, repair shops, and experienced ground personnel. As American construction battalions systematically created new bases advancing toward Japan, while Japanese facilities faced destruction, conventional air operations became impossible. Kamikaze attacks, needing only single-flight fuel and minimal ground support, represented a desperate attempt to sustain air combat despite vanishing base infrastructure. Captured Japanese intelligence files disclosed attempts to devise countermeasures against American construction. Special sabotage squads were supposed to target construction equipment and eliminate equipment operators. Chemical contamination of construction sites received consideration. None of these schemes achieved meaningful results, reflecting both Japanese incapacity and American defensive measures. The final Japanese homeland defense plans, drawn up during 1945, demonstrated complete awareness of American construction capabilities. Strategy anticipated that any American invasion would rapidly create massive base systems despite resistance. The approach shifted from preventing base construction to forcing Americans to erect those bases across Japanese casualties, gambling that losses might prompt peace negotiations rather than unconditional surrender. By late 1944, Japan's top military leadership fully comprehended the strategic consequences of American construction capacity. Though this understanding came too late to alter the war's progression, the Tojo government's downfall following Saipan's loss reflected political recognition that B-29 bases would soon position American bombers directly over Japanese cities for sustained attacks. Japanese military reaction revealed their grasp of the construction threat. The ferocious defense of Iwo Jima, where Japanese forces inflicted America's highest casualty rate across any Pacific engagement, stemmed from knowing those airfields would provide fighter coverage for B-29 bombers striking the mainland. Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita's rejection of traditional banzai assaults for calculated defensive operations signified understanding that airfields would rise regardless. The sole variable involved the cost in American casualties. Japanese tactics at Okinawa similarly reflected this calculus, holding ground as long as possible while kamikaze squadrons attacked the American fleet. They acknowledged inevitable American base construction. Colonel Yohara's defensive strategy explicitly accepted that American forces would build runways and port facilities. Prevention was impossible. The aim became maximizing the price Japan exacted for that construction. The sequence from initial shock through growing comprehension to operational adaptation shows that Japanese forces did perceive and respond to American construction capabilities, even though detailed records of their observations largely disappeared. The military decisions themselves serve as testimony, communicating through actions what paperwork failed to preserve in words. Japanese military encounters with American construction capacity constitute a narrative conveyed more through engineering statistics and strategic outcomes than through survivor accounts and personal reflection. Destruction of Japanese records and scarcity of personal testimonies means we lack the detailed perspectives that would fully portray how individual Japanese servicemen and officers experienced confronting American construction superiority. Yet the surviving evidence, numerical data, operational decisions, scattered testimonies, and post-war analysis conveys a powerful message of progressive understanding and strategic consequence. Japanese military forces encountered something unprecedented in warfare: complete industrialization of military construction, enabling territorial expansion at velocities that pre-war strategists had never envisioned. The 20-day assembly of the Espiritu Santo airstrip, the 15-hour restoration of Tarawa's runway, the massive B-29 installations on Tinian Rising amid active combat. These accomplishments transcended mere engineering feats. They reflected an industrial and organizational capacity that sealed Japan's fate once American forces established a Pacific foothold. For Japanese officers who grasped the significance, Experiencing American construction capabilities must have generated profound demoralization. They confronted not merely American military forces, but American industrial civilization transported across the Pacific via bulldozers and prefabricated materials. Every Japanese defensive position, painstakingly built over months through human effort alone, could be replicated or surpassed by American teams in mere days or weeks. The strategic consequences proved unmistakable. Island hopping became possible through rapid base construction, bypassing Japanese strongholds and avoiding protracted sieges. American advance timelines compressed from predicted years into manageable months. Japan lay within bombardment range far sooner than Japanese planners anticipated. Most crucially, this exposed the Pacific War as fundamentally a contest between industrial systems. Japan could not compete in that arena. Surviving Japanese testimonies consistently reflect amazement at American equipment capabilities and construction speed. Military decisions expose deepening consciousness of construction's role in overall victory. The desperate late-war defensive stands at Iwo Jima and Okinawa acknowledged that American bases would be constructed irrespective of resistance. The kamikaze program represented an asymmetrical reaction to material advantages that conventional means could not counterbalance. The narrative concludes not with astounding accounts of American construction prowess, but with strategic surrender to industrial reality itself. Emperor Hirohito's surrender address on August 15, 1945, referenced a new and most terrible bomb, yet also admitted that the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. This careful language encompassed numerous factors, certainly including the understanding that American forces possessed the capacity to project industrial might across the Pacific at speeds and dimensions that made further resistance pointless. The construction battalion's motto, "We build, we fight," symbolized something revolutionary in combat. Fighting engineers capable of building under fire at industrial scale. For Japanese observers encountering this capability, it must have resembled confronting the future itself, a future where ideological fervor alone could not overcome bulldozers, modular building systems, and systematic industrial organization. The 6,000-foot runways, constructed in 20 days, represented more than engineering accomplishments. They signified a warfare paradigm that Japanese military heritage had never equipped them to oppose. Ultimately, the Japanese experience with American construction capabilities reflects what actions communicate rather than what statements preserve. The strategic adjustments, the defensive recalibrations, the final capitulation. These speak with greater force than vanished paperwork and forgotten voices. They chronicle a military recognizing too late that it faced not merely an adversary, but an industrial apparatus, and that spiritual excellence could never overcome bulldozers and industrial methodology. This encounter's implications extend well beyond 1945. The militarization of construction capabilities that the construction battalions exemplified throughout the Pacific became foundational to contemporary warfare. The capacity to swiftly establish installations, project logistical reach across immense distances, build faster than adversaries can destroy. These capabilities, first observed by astounded Japanese forces across the Pacific theater, remain essential to military strategy. For scholars, the sparsity of Japanese documentation regarding American construction capabilities represents both a limitation and an enlightenment. It frustrates because we lack personal narratives that would provide emotional resonance and human dimension. It instructs because history often emerges from systems and capabilities that observers never fully record, frequently lacking conceptual vocabulary to articulate their significance. Japanese servicemen observing construction battalions erect runways in impossibly short timeframes were witnessing a transformation in military capability, though they might have lacked the intellectual frameworks to fully articulate the moment's historical weight. Numbers, however, transcend these limitations with unambiguous clarity across decades. The 111 major runways, the 441 piers, the installations for 1.5 million troops. These feats fundamentally altered the Pacific conflict's trajectory. For Japanese soldiers who observed bases ascending from jungle and atoll, who witnessed airfields become combat-ready in days rather than months, who saw American construction moving inexorably closer to their homeland. Those numbers embodied far more than mere statistics. They represented an arriving future, traveling at speeds their military tradition had never imagined feasible. The Pacific's reshaping through American construction represents one of the war's most consequential yet under-examined components. While Japanese forces frequently matched American bravery and occasionally exceeded American battlefield expertise, they could not duplicate the industrial machinery that converted island territories into forward bases with extraordinary speed. This industrial and organizational superiority, manifested in construction battalion achievements, proved as conclusive as any battle in determining the Pacific conflict's outcome and Japan's ultimate defeat.